Most people never notice the moment when an era ends. They imagine a dramatic collapse, a sudden crash, a moment so violent that the world instantly realizes everything has changed. But history shows it differently. The end of every monetary era begins quietly, unnoticed, almost politely. It starts with small cracks behind a confident smile, warnings whispered behind closed doors, and numbers that no longer make sense, even when governments insist they do. Right now, in 2025, we are living inside one of these moments, one of those calm before the storm. Years that generations later will be studied as the point where the global financial system crossed the line of no return. Not because of a single disaster, but because too many forces converged at once, pulling the world toward the inevitable fall of the fiat system that was built more than 50 years ago. In every empire before ours, there was a moment where the people still trusted the money in their hands, even as those in power quietly created more of it. Rome clipped its silver coins. Spain flooded Europe with gold until it became worthless. Britain printed to finance war after war. And each time, the people believed the same comforting illusion. This time is different. This time, the empire is too strong to fall. But the numbers don't lie. The patterns don't change. And in 2025, we are repeating them step by step. You can feel it even if you can't explain it. Prices that never go back down. A currency that buys less every year. A debt that grows faster than the economy that's supposed to support it. People working harder but falling further behind. Governments spending money they don't have, promising outcomes they can't deliver, and insisting everything is fine even as the foundations crack beneath their feet. The old fiat era is ending, not because someone wants it to, but because mathematically it cannot continue. In 1971, the world entered an experiment, money backed by nothing, created in unlimited quantities, controlled by politicians, and dependent on confidence that would someday run out. For decades, that experiment looked successful. Economies expanded, stock markets rose, living standards improved, and entire generations assumed the system was permanent. But the cost of that illusion has been compounding in the background. Every crisis required more money. Every downturn required bigger bailouts. Every year, the system demanded a larger dose of the same drug: easy debt, cheap currency, and unlimited creation. And by 2025, that addiction has reached a level where the next crisis will not be met with a solution, but with a breaking point. This isn't fear. This is mathematics. When debt grows faster than income, collapse is not a possibility. It is a timeline. When a currency is printed faster than productivity can support, its value is guaranteed to fall. When trust is stretched beyond what reality can justify, confidence doesn't fade slowly. It shatters. And right now, confidence in fiat currency is standing on its last leg. Central banks know it. Investors sense it. Ordinary people feel it, even if they don't understand the mechanics. Something is shifting. Something is ending. Something new is forcing its way into existence, and no government, no institution, no politician can stop what has already been set in motion. Every major empire in history reached a moment where its currency became too weak to support its ambitions. And every time, that moment marked the beginning of the end. Not the end of life, not the end of civilization, but the end of an era and the birth of a new one, shaped by crisis, reset, and transformation. In 2025, we stand at that same threshold. The signs are everywhere. Debt curves that go vertical, inflation that refuses to die, interest costs higher than tax revenue, central banks trapped between raising rates and destroying the system, or lowering them and destroying the currency. It's a no-win scenario, a place where every path leads toward the same outcome: the end of fiat stability. The world has been here before, but never on this scale, never with this speed, never with every major economy facing the same pressure at the same time. This is not just another downturn. It is not another recession. It is not another cycle. It is the closing act of a monetary era. And the collapse won't start with panic. It will start with disbelief. With people noticing that something feels off. With markets behaving strangely. With governments insisting everything is fine. With experts arguing on TV while quietly preparing for the worst. That is where we are right now. The quiet part of the storm. The part history remembers. But people living inside it often miss. Because the true collapse begins not when the system fails, but when the system can no longer hide the fact that it already has. The collapse of a monetary era never begins with fire. It begins with mathematics quietly overpowering politics. And 2025 is the year where the math finally stops cooperating. Most people believe an economic collapse comes from chaos, but it actually starts with something far more subtle. A system that can no longer sustain its own promises. For decades, governments around the world have financed growth, wars, social programs, emergencies, and political agendas with money that didn't exist. Debt became the default solution, the universal tool, the answer to every crisis. But debt is not free. Every dollar borrowed is a claim on the future, a promise that someday someone will pay it back. And in 2025, that promise has finally grown larger than the future that's supposed to honor it. The numbers are staggering. Debt curves once shaped like gentle hills have become vertical walls. Interest payments that once were manageable have now become the largest expense in entire national budgets. And the central banks, those institutions that once manipulated the tides of the global economy with a whisper, now find themselves trapped in a paradox with no exit. If they raise interest rates, the debt becomes unpayable. If they lower rates, inflation surges. If they print money, confidence dies. If they stop printing, the system freezes and collapses anyway. This is not a cycle. This is a trap one, created by decades of avoiding the very pain that could have prevented this moment. And here is the detail almost nobody understands. Fiat systems do not collapse when debt is too high. They collapse when belief in the currency itself evaporates. The dollar, the euro, the yen, the pound, these are not backed by gold or silver or anything tangible. Their value comes from trust, confidence, faith, a belief that tomorrow they will still buy what they buy today. But when governments abuse that faith long enough, the people eventually begin to realize the truth. The currency in their hand is not a store of value, but a slow-moving illusion dying in real time. That moment always comes suddenly, even after years of warning signs. A country prints too much. A bank fails unexpectedly. Inflation returns stronger than before. A government announces a new round of emergency spending. Another geopolitical shock hits. A bond auction fails. A foreign nation sells off reserves. A crisis in one region spreads globally in minutes. These are not isolated events. They are pressure points in a system already cracking from within. In 2025, the pressure is everywhere. The world's largest economies have synchronized their weaknesses. The United States stands at a fiscal cliff where interest payments now exceed defense spending. Europe is drowning in energy instability and demographic decline. Japan has reached debt levels previously considered impossible. China faces a real estate implosion of historic scale. And emerging markets are suffocating under a dollar system they can no longer afford to survive in. This is the first time in history that every major pillar of the global economy is fragile at the exact same time. One tremor, one shock, one unexpected event, and the entire pyramid begins to shift. But collapse is not one event. It is a sequence. First, the bond market falters. Interest rates spike unexpectedly. Foreign buyers step back. Domestic buyers demand higher returns. Governments suddenly find themselves forced to refinance trillions at rates they cannot afford. Panic begins quietly in analyst reports, in emergency meetings, in back-channel phone calls inside central banks. Then, liquidity dries up. Money becomes scarce. Credit slows. Companies delay projects. Consumers reduce spending. The velocity of money, the heartbeat of an economy, begins to fade. What was once a rapid flow turns into a slow drip. Next comes the government response. They announce new measures, new guarantees, new rescue packages, new injections of freshly created currency into a system already drowning in it. They speak with confidence, but behind the scenes, the fear is palpable. They know they are using the last tools they have, and that each one comes with consequences. Then comes inflation's return. Not the mild, predictable, controlled inflation people learn to accept, but the chaotic kind, the kind that surges in waves. Prices rising, falling, rising again. Volatility replacing stability. The economy behaving like a storm-tossed ship rather than a steady machine. After that, trust begins to fracture. People look at their savings and wonder why the numbers grow, but the value shrinks. They look at interest rates and realize they will never catch up. They look at the government and see leaders who no longer control the system they built. And slowly, quietly, the public begins to lose faith in the currency itself. That is the final stage. That is the fatal wound no fiat system survives. Because once trust breaks, money dies, no matter how many laws, policies, or press conferences attempt to revive it. A currency collapse is not the destruction of paper. It is the destruction of belief. And 2025 is the year belief begins to slip out of the hands of those who have controlled it for generations. You can sense it. You can feel it. You can see the confusion in markets, the fear behind decisions, the unpredictability of every economic indicator. Something deeper is happening, something systemic, something irreversible, something that no expert can fully admit, because doing so would trigger the very panic they fear most. But the truth is simple. The fiat era is approaching its mathematical limit. And once a system reaches its limit, it doesn't slowly retreat. It snaps. The collapse of a monetary era does not end with destruction. It ends with transformation. But before the new system can emerge, the old one must break so completely that no one can pretend it still works. That is the stage the world is now approaching, not the chaos, but the reset. Every empire that dominated world finance eventually reached a moment where its currency no longer reflected its power. Rome's silver coin lost purity. Spain's gold lost value. Britain's pound lost global dominance. And now the US dollar, after nearly a century at the center of global trade, is facing pressures unlike anything in modern history. But this time, the world is not just watching the fall of one empire's currency. It is witnessing the unraveling of an entire global system that has relied on the same model: debt-backed fiat money, supported by trust, running on confidence, and expanding through endless printing. The cracks are visible everywhere. Nations that once held their wealth in dollars are quietly diversifying, shifting reserves into gold, commodities, foreign alliances, regional currencies, and digital alternatives. Central banks that once sold gold for dollars are now buying gold at record levels, reversing a 50-year trend. Financial institutions that once bet on infinite money creation are now bracing for a world where the old rules no longer apply. This is not speculation. It is preparation. Behind the scenes, governments are building new systems because they know the old one is reaching its final breaths. Central bank digital currencies, regional trade blocs, alternative payment networks, the dollarization agreements, these are not random experiments. They are exit doors. When the global financial order senses that the dominant currency is losing trust, it does not wait for collapse. It prepares for the reset. But resets are never clean. They bring volatility, conflict, and uncertainty. They create winners and losers. They redistribute power in unpredictable ways. And the world in 2025 is entering a stage where every nation, every institution, every corporation, and every investor is positioning themselves for what comes next. The first sign of a global reset is fragmentation. For decades, the world functioned under one financial language, the dollar system. But now, the system is splintering. Countries are creating new alliances, new trade routes, new payment structures. Some are forming economic blocs independent of Western banking systems. Others are trying to rewrite the rules of energy pricing, commodity trading, and digital finance. The second sign is acceleration. When nations sense that the old monetary order is weakening, they quickly move to protect themselves. They repatriate gold. They negotiate new deals. They shift reserves. They form new partnerships. These moves happen quietly at first, but eventually they appear in global headlines always framed as strategic adjustments, although they are far more than that. They are exits from a burning building. The third sign is public denial. Leaders will continue to insist the system is stable, that the currency is strong, that the economy is resilient. They will speak confidently because confidence is the last tool they have left. But behind the cameras, the conversations are different. They know what is coming. They see the numbers. They can feel the shift. And the shift always accelerates faster than anyone expects. A sudden shock may be geopolitical, may be financial, may be something the world doesn't see coming triggers the final sprint. Markets swing violently. Currencies fluctuate uncontrollably. Banks tighten lending. Governments enforce emergency measures. Investors panic. Citizens rush to protect their savings in whatever way they can. This is where the reset becomes real. Eventually, a global conference or coalition emerges to stabilize the world economy. The language will be diplomatic words like cooperation, restructuring, modernization. But the meaning will be clear. The fiat era as we knew it is over. The old debts will be reorganized, inflated away, or quietly defaulted on. The old currencies will lose purchasing power at a pace that can no longer be ignored. The old promises will be rewritten under new terms. Savings, pensions, bonds, and investments tied to the old system will be revalued, restructured, or reduced. A new monetary system will be introduced, one that claims to be more stable, more efficient, more future-ready. And yet, at its core, it will be a response to the failure of the previous era. This is how resets happen. Not with a single collapse, but with a chain of shifts that end in a new global order. Not with the destruction of civilization, but with the destruction of assumptions that once seemed permanent. Not with the fall of money, but with the fall of trust and the painful rebuilding of a new structure to replace it. In 2025, the world is not collapsing. It is transitioning. But transitions of this scale are never smooth. They shake economies. They reshape societies. They reorder power. And they leave behind a simple truth. When a currency dies, the world that relied on it dies with it. What comes after will be new, different, and disruptive. And the final stage, the stage where this shift becomes undeniable, is approaching faster than anyone expects. The final stage of any monetary era feels surreal. People go to work, buy groceries, scroll through their phones, and try to live normally, even as the financial world beneath them shifts in ways they can't fully see. History's greatest economic transitions never felt like chaos in the beginning. They felt like confusion, like uncertainty, like something invisible was changing direction, even if nobody could explain what or why. That is where we stand now. A global system that once appeared unshakable is showing every sign of exhaustion. A currency once trusted without question is now questioned without trust. The foundations of fiat confidence, stability, and credibility are cracking, and each crack widens with every new event, every new announcement, every new piece of data that contradicts the official narrative. But the true end of a monetary era does not come when the system collapses. It comes when the majority silently accepts that it already has. People begin to notice that prices never return to normal, that savings seem to shrink even without being touched, that wages rise slower than inflation, that governments speak in reassurances instead of solutions, that central banks explain more and control less, that policies sound like temporary fixes to permanent problems. And slowly, almost subconsciously, the public begins to adapt. They spend differently, save differently, invest differently, think differently. They begin looking for storehouses of value outside the currency they no longer trust. They look toward land, metals, commodities, digital assets, productive businesses, anything that feels grounded in the physical world rather than printed into existence. This shift is psychological, and when it begins, it cannot be undone, because the end of fiat is not the end of money. It is the end of believing that money created from nothing can hold value forever. And once that belief dies, the system built on it can no longer function. In the final phase of collapse, governments around the world will attempt the same strategies that every failed monetary system has tried before. They will announce new programs, new limits, new mechanisms, new forms of currency. Some will propose digital-only systems. Others will attempt capital controls. Some will freeze spending. Others will print more aggressively. Each nation will try to patch its currency's wounds with solutions that ignore the cause. But the mathematics will not bend. You cannot print prosperity. You cannot legislate trust. You cannot vote away economic reality. And you cannot revive a currency that people no longer believe in. What comes next is not the destruction of society, but a reordering of it. A shift away from an era where value was created instantly with keystrokes, back toward one where value must be earned, produced, mined, built, or generated from real productivity. This transition will be painful because the old system allowed governments, corporations, and individuals to live far beyond their means for decades. The adjustment back to reality will feel like loss, but it is simply the end of borrowing from the future. The Fiat era was an age of expansion, credit, stimulus, and artificial stability. The era that follows will be an age of discipline, scarcity, and recalibration. Not because we chose it, but because the system has reached its limit. Yet within every collapse lies opportunity, massive, generational opportunity. The people who understand what is coming will not freeze in fear. They will position themselves for the world that rises from the reset. They will build in the cracks. They will stand where others retreat. They will identify the assets, industries, and technologies that thrive in times of uncertainty. They will prepare not with panic, but with clarity. Because the end of an era is not the end of the world. It is the end of the old world, and the beginning of the next one. In the aftermath of every major monetary transition, new leaders emerge. New innovations rise. New economic models are built. New fortunes are created. New systems take shape. Those who adapt early shape the era to come. Those who cling to the past are washed away by it. The collapse of fiat is not a single moment, but a turning point, a moment future historians will look back on and say, this is where the story changed. And in 2025, that turning point is no longer on the horizon. It is here, quietly, slowly, inevitably. The age of fiat currency, the age built on debt, trust, and infinite creation is reaching its final chapter. A new monetary world is emerging, one that will redefine value, trade, wealth, power, and opportunity for decades to come. The question is no longer if the fiat era will end. The question is who will be prepared when it does. Because the world is not collapsing, it is transforming. And the people who understand this shift will not fear the future. They will lead it.